After my father's funeral, I faced a significant decision regarding the $9 million inheritance he left behind. I chose to share it equally with my mother, a choice that seemed straightforward until Stephen's involvement complicated matters. While reviewing the inheritance documents without my consent, Stephen casually commented, "Inaya, don't be too greedy," and even mentioned quitting his job, thanking that doddering old man, a disrespectful reference to my late father that I couldn't ignore. Caught off guard by his words, I reacted, and our conversation soon took a backseat as Stephen and my mother-in-law excitedly made plans to splurge on a new car and shopping sprees. This blatant disregard for the somber mood and their insensitive behavior pushed me to my emotional limits. Overwhelmed by household responsibilities, constant demands for money, and their Stephen of respect for my father, I found myself wanting to escape the toxic environment of living with Stephen and my mother-in-law. Attempting to keep the peace, I masked my frustration with a smile and encouraged them to use the inheritance as they wished. Despite my growing resentment, I am Inaya, a 34-year-old who once worked alongside my husband in a domestic setting. My parents, both doctors, managed a reputable clinic in our hometown. As their only child, I was deeply cherished. After graduating from the School of Pharmacy, I landed a job at a laboratory technician company. Although my career path diverged from what my parents envisioned, they supported my choices. The loss of my mother in a tragic accident 10 years ago devastated both my father and me. During those tough times, Stephen, who was then my boyfriend, stood by me. We initially met through a mutual friend, and 2 years after my mother's passing, Stephen proposed. He worked as a regular food technologist and beverage industry, and despite earning less than me, I believed in our ability to overcome many challenges together. When I shared the news of our engagement, my father was delighted, appreciating Stephen's support and entrusting him with my care. However, the bliss was short-lived when we visited Stephen's family to announce our marriage. His mother, with her garish makeup and having been divorced from Stephen's father, scrutinized me harshly. She questioned Stephen's choice in marrying someone she deemed too plain and old for him, suggesting a younger, prettier match would be more suitable. Stephen quickly defended me, highlighting my successful career and my father's reputable medical practice. This series of events, from my father's death and dealing with the inheritance to facing familial tensions, has tested my resilience and forced me to reconsider the dynamics of my relationships and the true intentions of those closest to me. Despite Stephen's initial enthusiasm about our marriage, I felt an underlying unease that I couldn't dismiss. Everything seemed to fall into place when my father, a doctor and real estate investor, generously gifted us a luxurious apartment in New York City as a wedding present. I was thrilled to share this news with Stephen, envisioning our new life together in this beautiful setting. "This is our new home," I told him, filled with dreams of a happy and peaceful future. Stephen's smile mirrored my happiness, and it felt like the perfect start to our married life. However, the reality of our day-to-day life began to surface soon after the wedding. Stephen, who had lived with his parents up until our marriage, seemed completely unaware of how to manage basic household tasks. He couldn't cook, was baffled by the washing machine, and showed little interest in learning any domestic skills. His careless attitude was evident as he left messes around the house, never bothering to tidy up. While I had hoped for a partnership where we shared responsibilities, I found myself shouldering all the domestic burdens. During our first year of marriage, I tried to manage the household alone, attributing our issues to the typical adjustment period of the honeymoon phase. However, the strain of balancing work and an overwhelming amount of chores pushed me to my limits. By our second year together, I knew we needed to address these issues head-on. Determined to find a solution, I initiated a serious conversation with Stephen about sharing the household duties. To my disappointment, his response lacked any sense of responsibility or willingness to adapt. "I'm tired from work too," he said dismissively. "You're much better at chores than I am, right? It's better if you do them since I'm not good at it." His words felt like a dismissal of my feelings and efforts, leaving me to continue bearing the brunt of our household responsibilities. This realization that I might always have to manage our home alone added a layer of frustration to our marriage, revealing deeper issues in our relationship that extended beyond mere household chores. I discovered that Stephen's mother had very particular tastes, which added another layer of complexity to our relationship. Stephen was not particularly keen on celebrating occasions like Mother's Day, so I took it upon myself to pick out a thoughtful gift. I chose a high-quality scarf from a department store, hoping it would please her. However, her reaction was far from grateful. She called me expressing her disappointment because the scarf wasn't from a well-known luxury brand. She found it absurd that I had sent her a no-name item. Despite my attempts to explain the quality of the scarf, she insisted on receiving only luxury brand items. Shocked by her reaction, I relayed the incident to Stephen, hoping for some support. Yet, his response was dismissive. He simply suggested complying with her demands. From that point on, to avoid further displeasure, we started giving her cash as she demanded. Over time, as our marriage progressed into the 7th year, she began to visit our home frequently, often finding reasons to ask for more money. Stephen always complied without hesitation, despite the strain it placed on our already tight finances. As Stephen's income was modest, managing our daily expenses became a challenge, pushing me to occasionally dip into our savings to make ends meet. Despite these challenges, I acknowledged the importance of his mother in his life and, by extension, in mine, since she had supported me during some difficult times. Respecting her as someone significant to my husband, I endured these difficulties. By our 8th year of marriage, the routine had become all too familiar. I managed all the household chores and continued to handle the financial demands from my mother-in-law. During this taxing time, my father, whom I hadn't seen in a while, called me with devastating news. In a rare and emotional conversation, he revealed he was suffering from terminal cancer, and treatment was no longer an option. The news overwhelmed me, and as tears flowed, he comforted me as he had when I was a child, gently saying, "Inaya, this is fate. Let's accept it quietly." The burden of managing work, household responsibilities, and now frequent visits to my father's hospital became my reality. When I informed Stephen about my father's condition, his reaction was indifferent at best, offering only a hollow expression of sympathy and no real support. He visited my father just once in the hospital. As my father's care intensified, I found myself with no spare time or energy for Stephen, who seemed increasingly detached from the challenges I was facing. This period was a relentless juggling act that tested the limits of my resilience and our marriage's stability. As I sat by my father's hospital bed, he suddenly asked, "Inaya, how is your marriage with Stephen going?" Caught off guard by the question, I paused, reflecting on Stephen's distant attitude and his mother's demanding behavior. My hesitation must have conveyed more than words could, as my father gently told me, "Inaya, you don't have to endure this. Think about your happiness. Don't worry. You won't face any hardships after I'm gone." His words were a balm, but they also opened the floodgates of my emotions, and I wept as he held my hand, offering silent strength. 3 months later, my father passed away. The grief was immense, and I busied myself with funeral arrangements. Stephen, displaying a lack of empathy, did not assist with the preparations. Despite his indifference, the funeral was well attended, a testament to the many lives my father had touched. Both Stephen and his mother were there, their presence almost perfunctory. The day after the funeral, I received a call from a lawyer about my father's estate. It turned out that my father had left more than just memories. He had amassed over $9 million from his medical practice and savvy real estate investments. The weight of this inheritance was both a surprise and a burden, stirring a mix of gratitude and anxiety within me. After meeting with the lawyer and learning the details of the inheritance, I returned home exhausted. I spread the documents across my desk, but soon dozed off on the sofa, worn out by the day's emotions and revelations. I was awakened by the sound of cheerful voices. Stephen and his mother were unexpectedly in my home. As I sat up, disoriented, Stephen came over with a grin, holding the inheritance papers I had just received. "Yes, Inaya, well done," he exclaimed. Confused and still groggy, I realized he was holding the documents. "Wait, don't just read those without asking," I protested, my voice tinged with shock and anger. Unperturbed by my reaction, my mother-in-law chimed in excitedly. "Wow, an inheritance of $9 million. Isn't that amazing? Now we can live comfortably for the rest of our lives." Her enthusiasm, so starkly contrasting with the solemnity of the recent days, only added to my confusion and burgeoning resentment. At that moment, I realized that the challenges ahead might not just involve managing a large fortune, but also navigating the complex dynamics of my relationship with Stephen and his mother, whose interests suddenly seemed sharply focused on the financial windfall. I was still reeling from my father's funeral when my mother-in-law blurted out something that caught me completely off guard. Then, Stephen turned to me with a serious expression and dropped another bombshell. "By the way, about this $9 million, he began. "I've decided it will be split between me and my mom. His words were like a punch in the gut, especially since he'd snooped through the inheritance documents without my permission. His next comments added insult to injury. Inaya, don't be too greedy. Oh, now I can finally quit my job. I have to thank that doddering old man. His reference to my late father with such disrespect made me inadvertently speak out loud in shock. Stephen, ignoring my reaction and confusion, quickly moved on. Let's proceed with the inheritance process and get the money into our joint account as soon as possible. As if on cue, he and my mother-in-law started excitedly planning out how to spend the money on a new car and lavish shopping sprees. Their blatant disregard for my feelings pushed me to the edge. I was burdened with household chores, constant demands for money, and now this disrespect towards my father. Trying to contain my boiling anger, I replied with a forced smile. Sure, use the money however you and my mother-in-law please. Her reaction was immediate and pleased. That's the spirit, Inaya. Quick to agree. Now, make sure you work hard and earn money. I don't want our savings to decrease. So work hard. I just nodded, seething inside while pretending to absorb her selfish demands. After this exchange, Stephen and my mother-in-law started living extravagantly as if they had won the lottery. Stephen quit his job almost immediately, and my mother-in-law practically moved in with us, turning our home into her own. They would leave in the morning and return laden with luxury brand purchases, even critiquing the 3-star restaurants they dined at as being a bit underwhelming for us, the sophisticated ones. Their conversations revolved around their new lavish lifestyle, while I was left to manage all the household chores, treated more like a servant than a family member. Stephen seemed to believe that my father's inheritance was a never-ending resource. He carelessly withdrew money from our joint account, and soon my own savings of $290,000 began to dwindle alarmingly. When I expressed my concern over their excessive spending, Stephen just laughed it off, showing no regard for the financial strain they were putting us under. I had already expressed my concern about their lavish spending, pointing out, "Isn't $9 million coming soon? This kind of spending is no big deal." But Stephen shrugged off my warnings. A month later, to my surprise, Stephen and my mother-in-law announced they were taking a trip to Hawaii without me. I waved them off, alone, and resolved to take action. About a week after their departure, while I was enjoying a quiet moment at home, I was startled by a loud knock at the door. Peering through the intercom monitor, I saw Stephen and my mother-in-law, clad in aloha shirts, looking perplexed outside. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone calm yet icy. "Why won't the door open?" Stephen shouted, frustration evident in his voice. Standing firm, I replied through the intercom, "Well, I changed the locks, so of course it won't open." "What? Why? Let's talk this over calmly at the nearby cafe. Please go ahead." "I'll join you shortly," I suggested. After some futile shouting, they headed to the cafe. Once they were gone, I followed, prepared for a confrontation. Upon arriving at the cafe, I found Stephen and his mother already there, seething with anger. "Hey, what's this about? Did you change the locks? Hand over the new keys right now," Stephen demanded. "There's no need for me to give you the new keys. You both need to leave that house," I replied calmly, facing an irate Stephen. I then presented them with a document. It was a divorce petition I had already filled out. "Divorce? You're serious about divorcing me?" Stephen was shocked, his voice rising in disbelief. His mother, equally astounded, chimed in. "Inaya, why has it come to this?" I spoke quietly, addressing their panic and confusion. "Given how you've been spending lavishly every day, are you sure your finances are okay?" "What money? Of course, it's fine," Stephen retorted vehemently, spittle flying as he spoke. "Your father's inheritance is coming, right? There should still be over $90,000 in our joint account. Look, I'll show you right now." Saying this, Stephen pulled out his smartphone and opened the banking app to check the account. As the screen loaded, his confident expression faltered and then changed abruptly. What's this? Why is there?" His voice trailed off as he stared at the screen, the reality of the financial situation hitting him. When Stephen saw that the money was missing from our account, his confusion was palpable. "The money's gone. It was there just the other day," he exclaimed. His mother, equally alarmed, checked her own phone, her expression mirroring Stephen's bewilderment. As they scrambled to understand what had happened, I calmly unveiled the reality of the situation. "Of course, it's gone. I'm divorcing you. So I've moved that $90,000 to my own account as part of the property division," I explained. "What do you mean?" Stephen's initial shock quickly turned to anger. But then he smirked, as if he had suddenly remembered something important. Fine, I'll divorce you then. Transfer the inheritance you got from your dad right away. After all, property acquired during the marriage is split half and half in a divorce, right? You might be misunderstanding something, I responded coolly. Didn't you know? The inheritance I received, even though it was during our marriage, doesn't count towards property division. There was a moment of heavy silence as this information sank in. Stephen and his mother's expressions shifted dramatically, the realization dawning on them that they might not have a claim to my inheritance. They were visibly shocked, and I could only sigh in disbelief at their audacity. No, that can't be true. That's impossible. Stephen's mother exclaimed, her face flushing a mix of denial and anger. Please, check for yourself, I said, my tone laced with mockery. Stephen frantically began searching on his smartphone, trying to find any information that might contradict what I had just told them. As Stephen and his mother stared at the smartphone screen, the reality of the legal situation became undeniable. It says here property inherited by one spouse from a parent is considered separate property. Therefore, it's not subject to division and can't be split between the spouses. Stephen read aloud, his voice tinged with disbelief. What? Seriously? His mother exclaimed, her face a picture of shock, then desperation seeping into his tone. Stephen turned to me. Inaya, please don't divorce me. I have no savings and no job. How am I supposed to live if you leave me? Facing him, I responded with a clarity and firmness I had never shown before. What are you talking about? Take responsibility for your actions. I will never forget how you and your mother treated me. I'm divorcing you, and I'll go to court if I have to. Intimidated by my determined demeanor, which they had never seen, Stephen and his mother visibly recoiled, whimpering softly, leaving them dejected in the cafe. I walked out, resolute in my decision. The divorce proceedings went smoothly thereafter. The $90,000 I had moved from our joint account was acknowledged as part of the marital property division. Eventually, I managed to remove Stephen and his mother from my house. Stephen, having already squandered the money from our property division, found himself penniless, overwhelmed by bills from their lavish overseas trips and other expenses charged to his credit card. He quickly sank into debt. Stephen and his mother were forced to take on even more debt to manage these payments, and now live in a rundown apartment, working tirelessly every day to pay off their debts. The stark contrast to their former lavish lifestyle was a significant shock to them. On the other hand, after selling the condo I once shared with Stephen, I moved into the apartment that had belonged to my father. I continued working as before. But now, with the inheritance from my father, I live a financially comfortable life. With gratitude to my late father in my heart, I am determined to start anew and cherish my life ahead. I aim to protect my happiness and spend my days peacefully, embracing the lessons I've learned and the freedom I've gained.